A former Conservative Foreign Office Minister is being investigated by his party after calling for a range of Tory MPs and peers to face repercussions over their support for Israel. Alan Duncan previously served as Minister for International Development and Minister for Europe and the Americas under David Cameron and Theresa May. He has long criticised Israel for breaking international law via the illegal occupation and annexation of Palestinian territory. In 2017, he received an apology from Israel's ambassador to the UK, who was filmed saying he wanted to, quote, take down Duncan because he was, quote, causing a lot of problems. Duncan resigned from government in 2019 when his former boss, Boris Johnson, was elected as Tory party leader. Now Duncan has been placed under investigation for calling out, quote, extremists in his party, who he accused of lobbying the top of UK government in Israel's interests. Duncan made the remarks in an LBC interview this morning, where he also said the UK should immediately stop arms sales to Israel.
We should stop arms sales immediately. I think that anything in support of what is becoming a total catastrophe in Gaza is morally unacceptable. And what we have to accept is not just what they're doing now is wrong, it's what Israel's been doing for years has been wrong, because the Israeli Defense Force does not follow international law. It has been backing and supporting illegal settlers in the West Bank who steal Palestinian land. And it is that land theft, that annexation of Palestine, which is the origin of the problem, which has given rise to the Hamas atrocity and the battles we're seeing. The trouble is, there are a lot of people at the top of our own politics who refuse to condemn settlements and therefore are not supporters of international law. And I think the time has come to flush out those extremists in our own parliamentary politics and around it, some of whom are at the very top of government or have been, and they have never been called to account by journalists and the press to say, well, do you agree with your own party's policy? Do you condemn illegal settlements?
Duncan didn't stop there, though. He named the individuals in the Tory party he believed should be held accountable.
The Conservative Friends of Israel has been doing the bidding of Netanyahu, bypassing all proper processes of government to exercise undue influence at the top of government. So what you have is a lot of people now sitting around Rishi Sunak who are giving him appalling advice. Let's start with the head of CFI, or has been for many years, Lord Pollack. In my view, I think he should be removed from the Lords because he is exercising the interests of another country, not that of the parliament in which he sits. Joined, I have to say, by Lord Pickles. They're the sort of Laurel and Hardy who should be pushed out together. But at the top, I mean, slightly improved by the removal of Robert Jenrick and Suella Braverman, although even today, she is still supporting Israel and the bombing and the annihilation of people in Gaza. And she does not believe that settlements are wrong, nor, I suspect, do Michael Gove, Oliver Dowden, and Priti Patel, by the way, should be reinvestigated for her visit. We still don't know who paid for her trip when she came back and tried to change government policy as a result of going on a secret trip without actually telling her officials or even the local ambassador. And if you pick up Wikipedia and you read the entry for Tom Tugendhat, who is our security minister, it says, and I'll read it out, he condemned the United Nations Security Council for its official criticism of Israel's building settlements in the occupied Palestinian territories. Now, that may have been some years ago, but he's never removed that. He's never changed his view. How can you have a security minister in the British government who does not believe in international law when all this is going on? I think he should be sacked.
Nick Ferrari had to then, of course, ask Duncan the classic question about Israel's right to self-defense. Here's how he responded.
Does Israel have a right to defend itself?
It does in certain circumstances, but in the right way. So, by the way, do Palestinians who are bashed up by illegal settlers supported by the Israeli Defense Force have the right to defend themselves, because they are the ones who are originally being attacked. But if they try and do that, they're then called terrorists. Now, there's defense and there's defense. You cannot say that killing 30,000 people has been precision targeting. And if you have proper precision targeting, then yes, that is behaving properly within the rules of law. But I think the death of these aid workers shows that that is not working.
I had to put to you that the IDF would say that of those 30,000, and it's a tragedy that people have died, many of them were Hamas terrorists, is what the IDF would say to you, Sir Alan.
Yes, well, many of them probably were, but not 30,000. And how do they know? And when you bomb a hospital, you say, oh, it's full of terrorists. Well, I'm afraid the fact is you cannot just pile into a strip of land with 2 million people in it, which has been basically imprisoned for decades, and somehow say that, oh, it's all their fault when they fight back. So what we now have in Gaza is imposed famine. That is not following the rules that you just questioned me about, imposed to the point where we, as Brits, have to build a pontoon to try and take food into Gaza for a starvation famine which has been caused by the Israelis. And, try to count to 30,000. Try just to count to the number of people who are kids with no parents, no families, no limbs. Then I think you will realize what's going on in Gaza.
A Conservative Party spokesperson confirmed that Duncan is now undergoing a disciplinary process as a result of those comments. Duncan is one of the few Tories who have publicly backed an end to the UK continuing arms sales to Israel. That small group just got a boost, however, because Tory peer Nicholas Soames, the grandson of Winston Churchill, said he believed it was time to cease arms exports to Israel. The Guardian reports Soames saying this. It's probably time that happened now, yes. I think if we're determined to show that we are not prepared to countenance these ongoing disasters, Israel has every right to go after Hamas, there's no shadow of a doubt about that, that the UK's contribution to Israel's arsenal would be tiny, it's probably parts more than anything else. He also said this. What happened with the deaths of 7 aid workers was an absolute tragedy, and secondly, it was absolutely inexcusable. This is not a fog of war issue. The whole thing had been deconflicted, organised, everything, and something has gone very, very wrong, and the Israelis really need to get a grip of all of this. Secondly, these people were doing the most wonderful work to provide aid to starving Palestinians. I think it is the message that matters. Soames, as you could probably tell from that, is hardly a pro-Palestine voice, but he has rebelled against the Tory party before. In 2019, he voted to block a no-deal Brexit. Helena, if Alan Duncan is under investigation, surely Suella Braverman should be too for going completely off-piste.
I mean, at the end of the day, you have to scrutinise whose interests are fundamentally being served by each of these positions. And of course, Suella Braverman is pro-Israel, so she gets away with whatever she wants to do. And Alan Duncan is pro-Palestine, so he gets subjected to the same kind of McCarthyism that people within the Labour Party have been subjected to, but very kind of similar statements about people who are serving other people's interests. I find it quite interesting as well, specifically in the statements that were made there by Duncan. He called out Conservative Friends of Israel. Now, there's a really great Peter Obon article in the Independent today. I highly recommend everybody going and reading, which talks about the influence of Conservative Friends of Israel in how they've changed in which the Conservative Party has functioned internally. Specifically, this is referring to Alan Duncan again. Of course, there's the Shai Masot moment that you mentioned earlier on in this segment, but in 2011, he had an actual run-in with Conservative Friends of Israel itself, when he was in a video when he was a junior minister in the Department for International Development, talking about specifically saying that that the Israelis were engaging in a land grab within the occupied territories, which is, of course, 100% true. You literally cannot argue against that 100%, because even if you just take the 1967 borders, which is the internationally recognized ones, as being like the statement at which you say, well, anything past there is a land grab, then we know, of course, they have. The illegal settlements are land grabs. That is not up for debate. Conservative Friends of Israel, specifically, in their own statements, went to the highest echelons of government to try and get this removed. Now, that's just, and Peter Obon's words were saying, well, that's just kind of a euphemism for Downing Street, essentially, with David Cameron as Prime Minister. Again, somebody who had made comments about the Israel-Gaza conflict that I think would be laudable, like calling Gaza an open-air prison, which is true, was then the one who, again, we can only assume from this information, that then led to that video from the DFID website getting taken down, because it was critical of Israel's illegal actions in the West Bank. And that was Alan Duncan, who was at the mercy of CFI in that point. In that same article, Peter Obon also talks about how CFI went to the leadership of the Conservative Party when, during the Lebanon War in 2006, again, a resigning matter for Tony Blair, where William Hague specifically referred to the Israelis' actions as being disproportionate. And turns out those comments were then being removed. And now, of course, have you ever heard anybody call Israel's actions disproportionate since? No, of course you haven't. So there is also plenty of people who have influence within the Conservative Party in being able to change people's positions. And when we see the McCarthyism that comes down, and Alan Duncan is now a victim of this kind of action against him because of his pro-Palestine voice for the third time. Of course, I can't tell you whether CFI are necessarily involved in this specific instance. But of course, he is the one who we can see is being investigated, and again only through double standards, because of course when anybody makes kind of similar statements which undermine the government's position, as Suella Braverman has done, as you recognised in your original question, does she get investigated? Of course she doesn't. Of course she can get away with anything. But as soon as somebody in that same statement is being pro-Palestine, they are immediately investigated, and we see the same in the Labour Party as well. And so we really do have to call out the level to which that lobbyists have been central to Alan Duncan's internal play against the Conservative Party thus far. Very, very, very dark.